Let's assume, for argument's sake, Babu, that young Mohandas, had succeeded as a barrister in Bombay. His clients would have been 95% Gujarati. His friends would have been Gujarati. He would have spoken only Gujarati, mostly met Gujarati Hindus. In South Africa, where he meets for the first time professional success, because unlike in Bombay and Rajkot, where he had failed as a barrister, in South Africa he also has a monopoly because he's the only lawyer for 80 or 100,000 Indians there. It really molds him because it deepens his understanding of the diversity of India. The person who calls into South Africa is a Gujarati but a Muslim. The first serious supporter of his work is a Gujarati but a Parsi Rustamji. Then, when the movement is faltering, his Satyagraha campaigns are faltering, it's Tamils and Telugu speakers who revive and nourish and renew it. It's really in South Africa that he becomes an Indian, that he recognizes India is the most diverse, heterogeneous place in terms of religion, language, worldview, cuisine, forms of dress, and that diversity has to be cherished and encouraged, not suppressed and threatened. And that's the lesson, of course, he takes back to India.
You grew up in Dehradun at the Forest Research Institute at the foothills of the Himalayas. So, what was your childhood like?
It was gorgeous, beautiful natural landscape, loving and caring and intelligent parents, room in the campus to play all kinds of sports, and also extremely diverse campus. Because public sector institutions in the 50s and 60s and 70s had Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, Christians. Our next door neighbor was a Parsi. My doctor was a Muslim. My father's closest colleague was a Sikh originally from pre-partition Punjab. So I think learning to glory in the diversity of the landscape and of the people around you.
Hello and welcome to Quizzitok. This is the podcast where we celebrate the joy of learning, the power of curiosity, and stories that inspire us. Today, I'm delighted to host someone whose work spans cricket, history, environmentalism, and sociology, Dr. Ramachandra Guha. He's not just one of India's most celebrated historians and public intellectuals. His own journey from a cricket-loving, book-devouring youth to a global authority on Gandhi and modern India is an inspiration and a sidelight. Ram has been a college mate at St. Stephen's. Very good to have you with us and to catch up with you on this particular podcast, Ram.
Thank you, Babu. I suppose I have to call you Siddharth from now on, but
No, Babu is
I
good
can with
because
Babu.
Babu is what everybody's been calling me on the podcast. And may I call you Ram?
Please.
So good to catch up with you. Another sidelight. As some might know, I've been privileged to work as a creative consultant on an epic series on Gandhi based on Ram's biographies, produced by Sameer Nair and the team at Applause Entertainment, with Hansal Mehta directing, Pratik Gandhi, a wonderful actor in the lead, and A.R. Rahman composing the music, along with an international cast bringing Gandhi's story to life. Ram, this series we worked on, it's been very elaborately and painstakingly put together over the last year and a half. What's your experience on it been like from what you've observed, what you've interacted with your kind of inputs? What can you sum up what we can expect? What's been your experience of it?
Well, Babu, it's been a long journey. So I wrote this 2-volume biography of Gandhi. The first part came out in 2014, the second in 2018. Shortly before the pandemic, early 2019, Sameer Nair of Applause contacted me. And he came to Bangalore and we had a very long chat. And he said he wanted to make turn these books into a web series. And I was, to begin with, lukewarm, but he was persistent. And we had several conversations over Zoom. And then again after the pandemic. And then, meanwhile, I was convinced that he was serious and focused. And I also saw in that time a wonderful one person play that Pratik Gandhi put all about Gandhi's early life in Hindi. And learned that he's formatively trilingual in Gujarati, Hindi, and in English, which is Gandhi's three languages. And meanwhile, my wife, Sujata, who's a designer, as you know, and whose judgment of these things I trust very much, had watched Scam 92 directed by Hansal Mehta and liked it very much.
In
So,
which Pratik Gandhi was absolutely brilliant.
so I,
Extraordinary.
to my eternal embarrassment, I haven't watched it, but I'd seen this play, so I could see he could do Gandhi very well. And then we signed a contract, and then of course, I was coordinating with this wonderful lady at Applause, Priya Jawar, and we were talking about the scripts and so on, and I was giving my feedback on the scripts, and it's really truly exciting to see it all come together. I haven't seen, as we speak, I haven't seen. I know that all of this has been shot. I went to the sets and saw how the South African scenes were recreated. But I'm really looking forward to seeing this series.
As am I, and I think viewers can really look forward to that. So today we'll delve a little into the making of Gandhi. I mean the man, not the epic series, as well as a little about the making of Ram Guha as a thinker, historian, and storyteller. So let's dive right in. Now, Ram's brilliant biographies, Gandhi Before India and Gandhi The Years That Changed the World, offer an unparalleled insight into the life of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, how he was shaped by his family, experiences, and the world around him before becoming the Mahatma who led India to freedom. Through lesser known anecdotes and fascinating dimensions of Gandhi's life, we'll discuss how these books came about, what Gandhi's early years teach us, and the relevance of his principles in today's world. So sit back as we journey through the making of an extraordinary person. Now, Ram, your Gandhi biographies are considered definitive works on the Mahatma, though much had already been written about him. But in the 21st century, that's the kind of reputations they have earned. Now, what inspired you to delve into Gandhi's life so deeply, particularly his lesser known years and dimensions before India's independence movement?
So, Babu, I started my professional career as a historian of the environment. And my PhD thesis, which was also my first book, was on the peasant protest movement known as Chipko, which took place in the Uttarakhand Himalaya, and which gave birth to Indian environmentalism, grassroots environmentalism. And the activists of Chipko, and particularly the leaders of Chipko, were deeply influenced by Gandhi. So, studying Chipko, I studied Gandhi at, shall we say, secondhand. Then I turned to writing about the history of Indian democracy. And of course, Gandhi's ideas shaped how India won its freedom. Some of our early leaders like Nehru and Patel, whom we nurtured and groomed. Uh, then I went back to a boyhood love of mine, the game of cricket, and wrote a social history of cricket. And here I thought I would never find Gandhi, because Gandhi had a spectacular disregard for both film and cricket. India's two great popular passions. Gandhi had a little interest in either of them. But I found that though he did not play cricket, barely watch cricket, he shaped how cricket was played, the politics of cricket. I mean, my book on cricket, A Corner of a Foreign Field, was woven around the story of a remarkable family of Dalit cricketers whose journey had partly been enabled by Gandhi. But Gandhi created a social, cultural, intellectual environment in which a previously oppressed family could get at least some recognition for their extraordinary achievements. So I said, look, Gandhi has been stalking me all my life. I work on the environment, there is Gandhi. I work on Indian democracy, there is Gandhi. And I work on cricket, where I don't expect to find him. And the chap is there too. So when I compared the index to A Corner of a Foreign Field, I discovered there were some 36 index entries to Gandhi, to a man who never played, watched, or talked about cricket. So I said, I have to settle my account with this fellow and write about it. Not indirectly, not from the side, not from an adjacent perspective, but write about him. And while doing research, by digging up stuff in the archives, I found that though there were some very good biographies of Gandhi and first rate critical studies, works on his political philosophy, his ideas, uh, the South African period had been relatively understudied and underexplored. Although Gandhi, it was very intense, it was 20 years of his life. And before that, of course, he was another 2 decades in Gujarat and in Bombay and in London. And Gandhi comes back to India in 1915, where he's already in his mid 40s. So he's being shaped by his experience in Kathiawar, London, and especially South Africa. And I thought this deserves to be told in its entirety, autonomously and independent of what happens afterwards when he leaves the freedom struggle and becomes a Mahatma and so on and so forth. So it's really, and I'm glad, Babu, that this is how this erratic zigzag journey brought me to Gandhi. And I'm glad I started working on Gandhi only when I was in my early 40s. And the second volume of my biography came out, when I was just about turning 60. So about a decade and a half of work. And I think the timing was right because at 30, if I'd begun my research on Gandhi at 30, I'd have been too young, too callow, too immature to capture this complex, baffling, remarkable character. And if I started my research in the 50s rather than my early 40s, I'd have been old, too tired, too weary to make all these journeys. So, in a sense, serendipitously, the timing was also wrong. But this is how I really came to Gandhi because he had somehow touched me at every point in my professional journey. There were also the last point I make, there were also some incidental family connections. I come from a family in which some of my granduncles had been influenced by Gandhi. So I grew up in that kind of aura, but it's more the professional journey that brought me to Gandhi.
Very interesting to hear. Also, Ram, in your foreword to Gandhi Before India, which covers the period from 1869 when he was born to 1914, just before he comes back to India from South Africa, as it were, you mention how a particular course which you did at the University of California at Berkeley, uh, they wanted it on environmental history, which is what you were writing about. And then you suggested to them, because of the circumstances that were happening within the country, particularly, and elsewhere in the world too, you proposed to them it could be about arguments with Gandhi. And it was a class which was full, and he was speaking to everybody about it. And people from all over the world came, not just diasporic Indians. There were people from all over the world for different reasons were very interested in the subject because of Gandhi's relevance even today.
That really inspired me because one of the nice things about a great Western university is that when they ask you to teach a course, you can design it, you can frame it. You don't have to take orders from the UGC on what you can teach and what you can't teach. So they gave me the freedom. They said, you teach what you want. I said, I teach on Gandhi. They said, and very politely, they said, would you reconsider? You're known as an authority on the environment. This is the University of California at Berkeley. California is a place where environmentalism, renewable energy, tree hugging is cool. When I stuck to my guns, they permitted me to teach on Gandhi. And though one friend in Berkeley warned me, he said, are you sure? Because you'll find that most of your students are ABCDs, America born confused Desis. And they may even be ABCDEFGs, America born confused Desis emigrated from Gujarat. Because Gandhi, of course, is Gujarati. And I also thought there was a nagging doubt. Had I chosen the right decision to teach in a subject I was just beginning to explore, rather than a subject environment on which I had done substantial work over many years. But the first day I saw the class, I was so reassured, because there was a Burmese girl, there were a couple of African American students, there was a Jewish student interested in Gandhi. And there were a couple of ABCDs and at least one ABCDEFG too. But it was the most rich, diverse, uh, engaged class I've ever taught in my teaching career. And that reassured me that I must set aside everything else and devote the next couple of decades to Gandhi.
And that's how it came about. And I think it was published, the first one was published in about 2013.
13.
Was it right?
I'm 13
And
with
then-
80. Yeah.
Yeah. And the second in the series, of course, was about the freedom movement at large and Gandhi's role in it. And the third one was also a biography. And that's how it came together. Now, how did your research in this subject happen? Because so much had already been written about the man. I mean, it's voluminous and it's massive. And at the same time, for this particular period and other periods which you covered, how did your research unfold? His life must have required extensive digging outside of the collected works and everything which was otherwise readily available, archives, personal papers. Tell us a little bit about how you went about doing your research and writing the book.
So the first thing, Babu, was to go beyond the collected works. The collected works are 97 volumes. They contain
97
not everything,
volumes.
but about 95% of all that Gandhi said, did, spoke in three languages: English, Gujarati, and Hindi. So they're very substantial, and they should be the bedrock of anyone writing on Gandhi. But I did not want to restrict myself to those volumes. I wanted to go beyond them. The collected works tell you what Gandhi said, but not they give reproduce his letters to a range of correspondence, but not the letters that the correspondents wrote to him which provoked his responses. They tell you nothing about what a third party is writing to a fourth party about Gandhi. They don't contain stuff about the government records. The British Raj was obsessed with Gandhi, both in South Africa and here. For 30 years, his activities were covered almost daily by intelligence agents, and their reports are in archives scattered in these three continents. Then you have newspaper accounts, you have pamphlets, you have cartoons. And this, so, I, because I had been a historian for 20 years, I had some sense of where to look and how to look. So my research took me, of course, to South Africa. I made several trips there. The three most important places in India were Delhi, the National Archives and the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, the Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, which had a great deal of correspondence to Gandhi, and the records of the Bombay government in what was then the Bombay government, now the Maharashtra government in Mumbai. There's a wonderful Gothic, the Gothic part of Bombay, which is quite well. Uh, One of the less known uh, offices there is in a one full floor of the Elphinstone College. And that's the Maharashtra State Archives. It used to be the Bombay Government Archive, and they have all the records of the Bombay government. This is a lot of material where the British colonial state was tracking Gandhi while he was in Ahmedabad, while he was traveling around Western India, and especially during his jail terms. He was in prison in Yerawada jail in Pune in the 20s and the 30s and in the 40s. And in his last term of imprisonment, his closest associate, Mahadev Desai, died, and so did his wife, Kasturba. So there's these very vivid personal descriptions of two very important moments in Gandhi's life, where his closest friend and his wife, life's partner of 6 decades, died. So these three places in India, Delhi, Ahmedabad, and Bombay, were where I did a great deal of archival research, but there were places overseas. So, of course, England, the colonial records in Britain, the records of people who knew Gandhi in Cambridge and Oxford, in the Annie Besant papers, which are in a repository which is originally owned by the Theosophical Society, in the National Archives of the UK in Kew. So I had to spend several months there. Then I had to make trips to South Africa, 4 trips to South Africa, to look at what was there in Pretoria, Johannesburg, and Durban. And in America, there's a lovely little college on the East Coast, not far from Philadelphia, called Swarthmore, which is a Quaker college. And many of Gandhi's closest friends were Quakers. And Swarthmore College has an extraordinary peace archive, which has the private papers of hundreds of Quakers, several of whom were close to Gandhi. So I had to spend time there. I had one memorable trip even to Israel, because Gandhi's Jewish friend in South Africa, Herman Kallenbach, with whom he was an architect who funded and supported Gandhi and also gave the money for what was called the Tolstoy Farm, his descendants moved to Israel later. So in the town of Haifa were Kallenbach's papers, where I would travel every day from Tel Aviv to Haifa to do the research, and sit under the kindly, benevolent eye of Kallenbach's niece, Isa Sari, while I was taking notes. And the collection was so rich that I'm proud to say that, with the help of our then ambassador there, a very remarkable man whom you know of, who's a writer as well as the diplomat called Navteej Singh Sarnam, we were able to bring those papers back, right, after my research ended, and they're now in the National Archives. So the journey was enthralling, enriching, occasionally exasperating, but it took many, many years, and as I said, several countries, dozens of different repositories and archives, and that's how all this came about.
Ram, what comes through all this exhaustive research in various places, various sources, is that it was an adventure for you, right? That it was exciting for you, it was adventurous, and must have been quite a ride. And through all of that, what has come through is dimensions of the man, through not only his own writings and work, but through the views of his opponents, through intelligence agencies, through his friends, through everybody around him, that we get a whole lot of different dimensions on his man and his journey. And this is what I think gives the richness to your biographies of him. Let's start at the beginning of his life, as it were. his family and upbringing in Porbandar, which shaped many of his core values. To you, what stands out about those formative years?
Well, I think what stands out, several things stand out about his formative years. One is that Gandhi was, first chapter of my first volume says, middle caste, middle rank.
Yes.
So he was in a middle caste. He was not in the two upper caste, Brahmin or Kshatriya, nor was he a Shudra or a Dalit. So if you
Vodhbania, is that right?
Modhbania, and middle rank because he was an utterly mediocre student.
Yes.
In again talking about serendipitous discoveries, you'll remember that uh, in Daryaganj, the main road that runs in front of Golcha Cinema, there used to be a book bazaar on Sundays on the pavement.
That is transformed and that's still there, but in different form. Right?
It's got
from us
side.
days.
This is on the road. And there I found a volume published by the Publications Division. About 40 years ago. It was called Mahatma Gandhi is the Student. Now, there are two things about any volume published by the Publications Division. One is anyone can afford it, and usually no one can see it because they don't know how to market it. So I never heard of this book before.
Yes.
And it was written by a former principal of Gandhi School in Rajkot, which was then called the King Alfred High School. And this principal, while he was working in the school Gandhi had studied in, went through some old cupboards and he found Gandhi's attendance record and his mark sheets, which showed him to be an utterly indifferent student, which is kind of joyous because, there is a certain, in India where, particularly middle class families are obsessed with marks and getting into IIT or the law school or Delhi University or medical college. There's a real cachet in being a first class student. There's also for people like you and me a certain flamboyance in being a third class student. Yes, but he's right in the middle. No, he's not daring, he's not brilliant, but he's not a rebel either. And from such unpropitious circumstances, the Mahatma was made. So I think that is one of the joys of the discovery, that finding these mark sheets that a principal of his former school had found, and also attendance record. And the last line of this little book, J.M. Upadhyay was the author's name, and it turns out that no previous biographer had heard of it or found it, and I found it in Daryaganj. The last line of this book, this precious little book, ran something like this. I'm quoting from memory. It has been well said that Gandhiji made men out of clay. His first and undoubtedly most successful experiment was on himself. So I thought that was such an apt line, very beautifully, phrased line, because he was a mediocre chap, an indifferent student. And of course, in his autobiography, which many people have read, he talks about being weak, about being cowardly, about being a bad speaker. So it's the fact that he was such a spectacularly ordinary student. And later I found, though I don't think I put it in my biography, I wrote a column about it. So this is something he shared with Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the 20th century, who also did rather poorly in school. So this is a heartening message for all mediocre students today, and to their parents too. Don't judge them too harshly.
Yes, absolutely. In all of that, Ram, through his childhood in Porbandar, in Rajkot, and finally, when he went to Samaldas, I think it was at Bhavnagar, do you find anything from anecdotes, from relationships that reveal some seeds of the man he later became?
Not really. That come later. But what you do see early on is the role of chance and accident in Gandhi's life. So, sometimes a sad, even tragic event turns out to have benefited his own personal career inadvertently, indirectly, not that he wanted it. So his father's dead. So while studying at his, looking at his upbringing and the surroundings and the atmosphere, you recognize that actually his father's death kind of liberated him in a couple of ways. One is he could persuade his mother to let him to go to England. This is the 1880s when the first Gujarati writers are traveling abroad and they're publishing travelogues about their journeys, and that excites Gandhi. Now, if his father had been around, the father would have been a stern patriarch and would have said, "It's polluting to cross the Kala Pani. My reputation is at stake. I will get you a job in a princely state in Kathiawar, Porbandar or Rajkot or Wankaner, wherever the father was." So, in a sense, much later, there are various other accidents. The fact that he fails as a barrister in Bombay, then this escape route in South Africa. Much later, the death of Tilak allows him to emerge as a mass leader rather than work under Tilak's shadow. So, for a biographer, chance and contingency are very, very important. Of course, you have to make the best of these opportunities you get. But it's not as if it's preordained. Gandhi's journey was not preordained. And the extraordinary thing about him was he was always searching, thinking, learning, and experimenting. I think his autobiography is a very aptly titled. It is
Experiments with truth.
experiments, not just with truth, but with many other things too.
But with life itself. Yes. During his childhood years, one of the strong influences was his mother
Yeah.
and her beliefs.
Yes.
And of course, the way she dealt with him, apart from giving him permission to cross the Kalapani. That was something you deal with in your biography, which is very interesting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so his
mother.
mother, he was very close because he was one of the younger children in the family, and he was shy.
A number of siblings.
And the father would have been, at work, like even when we were growing up, offered in an Indian middle class family, the father was never there to talk to children, to listen to them. It was the mother who was the confidant and the sounding board. She belonged to a sect called the Pranamis, which was a rare syncretic sect. It was said that the founder of the sect had traveled abroad, maybe even been to Mecca. But we do know that the shrines of the Pranamis had verses from the Gita and the Puran. So I think his mother's influence was actually quite long lasting. One of Gandhi's great achievements was to recognize that India was a land of many religions, not one religion alone, right? And it's true he made Parsi friends, Muslim friends, and so on in school, but it was the going to this rather heterodox dissident sect, which did not have a orthodox, firm, disciplinarian attitude to religion. Which might have been the case if his mother had subscribed to some other more austere and narrow-minded sect. So I think that is something which I think is very visible. His mother's influence on his moral growth.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons her permission for him to cross the waters and go to London and to study to become a barrister there. That was such a key part. But one of the first times he asserted himself also was when his fellow caste men, the Mod Banya community, prohibited him, and he actually stood his ground and said, "No, I'm going." And then he went from Porbandar to London. Now, how did his time in England influence him from what you found out?
So
Tell
again,
us about it.
England is really important because it exposes him to many things that he would have not seen in Gujarat or even in India. So a different language, a different culture, a different landscape, a different form of architecture, and also different people. So his friendships in London, I think, are two, apart from the fact that he qualified as a lawyer and got a professional degree that helped him later, the two aspects of his life in London that are really, really very, very important to his later evolution. One is his friendship with English people. So, Babu, in the 1890s, when Gandhi is in London, the British are ruling India. The British are an extremely racist set of rulers in India. They erect themselves on top of Indian society. Brown people can't enter British clubs except as waiters and servants and cleaners. The great British historian David Gilmour has written a book on the Imperial Civil Service where he's called them the ruling caste because they set themselves up even higher than the Brahmins. Right. So if Gandhi had stayed in Kathiawar or in Bombay, he would have only known white people as superiors, as overbearing, arrogant superiors. But in London, an Indian could go and forge friendships of equality and mutual respect and affection. And there's where he met made his first English friends, especially someone called Josiah Oldfield, with whom he even shared a house, a very radical thing to do in 1891 for an Indian and an Englishman to actually share a house. Right. Now,
Yes, of course. London wasn't the multicultural place it is today. There were,
that's
what,
one thing.
barely 1,000 Indians or something in England at that time.
Absolutely. So that's, I think, one very important aspect of his time in London. He learned to treat human beings as human beings, and to recognize that their race, their religion, their form of dress was in a sense incidental. The second thing was that how he met Josiah Oldfield was he joined the Vegetarian Society of London. He was a vegetarian, as people of his community generally are. He was in a vegetarian restaurant in Holborn, not far from where the London School of Economics now is. And he discovered that there was a vegetarian society. That restaurant was selling pamphlets of the leading vegetarian thinker, Henry Salt. So Gandhi joins the society where he meets Oldfield and others, but more importantly, uh, learns how to organize for a cause. So they ask him to write. They say, tell us about Indian vegetarianism. And he writes a series of articles uh, published in the Journal of the Vegetarian Society. And he learns the importance of collective action. If you believe passionately in something, later on it became believe passionately in liberating India from British rule, in ending the pernicious practice of untouchability, in bringing women into public life. There were other causes he took up later, which are much more important and significant from a world historical point of view. But the first cause was killing animals is bad, and promote the idea killing animals for food is bad, and promote the idea that vegetarianism has an ethical component. It's not just cultural, it's also ethical. So he learns to deliberate, organize, work collectively with other people, and also write. So his first published articles are in the Journal of the Vegetarian Society of London. So Gandhi was, among other things, uh, is known for the very prolific output as a writer that he produced. And he also was an editor much later. He had Indian Opinion, and then, of course, Young India and Harijan in India. So for more than 40 years, he ran a newspaper in which he wrote a large chunk of that newspaper. And he also wrote classic books like his autobiography, Hind Swaraj, and so on. But it's really the vegetarians of London who showed him how to communicate through his writings, which is that is that it's a very charming thought that
Absolutely. It
that
crystallized his.
yeah, the small
It
eccentric
crystallized
sect.
many of his thoughts and his as a communicator. He wrote. I think you also write in your book on how he made his first speech at the Vegetarian Society, as it were, and that's how he started doing. And the roots of his activism lay in his association with the Vegetarian Society.
Absolutely, and that's again was a little known. I mean, I stressed it much more than others had because I thought it was very important. And that chapter is called "Among the Vegetarians." That's how they shaped him, how the vegetarians.
Right. And from there, of course, he came back, tried to make a go of it as a barrister. Didn't happen in what was then called Bombay. And through chance, as you mentioned a little while back, he went as pretty much a legal translator for Dada Abdullah for a case that was happening in South Africa. We moved to South Africa, which is really the critical years. Yeah. His time there was pivotal, where he really evolved into a leader and to the man he became. Now, what do you think were the key experiences that transformed him?
So before I come to South Africa, Babu,
Please,
just
please.
one thing about how accident and contingency shaped him. So he fails as a barrister in Bombay,
Yes.
but he could still have made it as a civil servant, a diwan in Kathiawar, because he's English educated. He's come from England.
Right.
So his family was hoping, because they didn't want to send him abroad again, that he would get a job in Porbandar where his father and his grandfather worked. Except that Gandhi's brother had been, and this is again a little known fact which I found cited by an American historian, Stephen Hay, in an unpublished paper, and then I tracked it in more detail through the archives. A little known fact is that Gandhi's brother had been involved in something very shady in Porbandar. Gandhi's brother Lakshmi Raj he was working with the crown prince, and the crown prince was intriguing against the Maharaja, And the crown prince was a dissolute, drinking drunkard who spent a lot of money. And with the help of Gandhi's brother, he tried to organize the heist of the palace jewels and got caught. So the name of the Gandhi family was Majid Porbandar. Now, this was again a very thrilling discovery Gandhi really euphemizes in his autobiography because he doesn't want to say bad things about his brother. But that's how he goes to South Africa. And in South Africa, where he meets for the first time professional success, because unlike in Bombay and Rajkot, where he had failed as a barrister, in South Africa, he also has a monopoly because he's the only lawyer for 80 or 100,000 Indians there. It really molds him because it deepens his understanding of the diversity of India.
Hmm.
Let's assume for argument's sake, Babu, that young Mohandas, had succeeded as a barrister in Bombay. His clients should have been 95% Gujarati. 95% of them would have been from his same caste. He had to settle commercial disputes for them. His friends would have been Gujaratis. He would have spoken only Gujarati, mostly met Gujarati Hindus. And here he's exposed to a very heterogeneous set of Indians. Of course, he meets white people, he meets Jews and Christians of different denominations. But the person who calls him to South Africa is a Gujarati but a Muslim. The first serious supporter of his work is a Gujarati but a Parsi Rustamji. Then, when the movement is faltering, his Satyagraha campaigns are faltering, it's Tamils and Telugu speakers who revive and nourish and renew it. So I think it's really in South Africa that he becomes an Indian, that he recognizes India is the most diverse, heterogeneous place in terms of religion, language, worldview, cuisine, forms of dress, and that diversity has to be cherished and encouraged, not suppressed and flattened. And that's the lesson, of course, he takes back to India. That's one very important lesson he takes back to India.
Yes, and those were the key experiences that formed him over there in various aspects, in the sense of his finding his calling, because he became a fairly successful lawyer in South Africa, speaking for them as an anti-racist, as an anti-colonialist, as it were, in gradual stages, of course. All of that happened in South Africa. Also, his views, his whole engagement with people of a completely different class, the indentured laborers, which were largely from who were largely Tamil or Telugu, as the case may be, are also from some of the Hindi-speaking areas. Those are the majority of the indentured labor over there. He took up their causes and did all of that over there. But also women's empowerment, in a sense. I think he found that all out there, and most importantly, I think how his beliefs and practice of civil disobedience came about. Tell us about that.
So, before I come to civil disobedience, I'll just pick up on one item, which is women's empowerment.
Yeah.
Gandhi's father was patriarchal, he was patriarchal. He very frankly talks in his autobiography about how he expected his wife, Kasturba, to always be submissive and deferential. Now, in South Africa, he made two women friends, neither of whom were Indian. There was an English woman called Millie Pollack, who was married to Gandhi's close associate, Henry Pollack. And the Pollacks and the Gandhis shared a home in Johannesburg, where Millie Pollack saw him suppressing and repressing Kasturba and berated him for it. And kind of slowly opened his mind and made him feel a little guilty about his treatment of his wife in particular. And then he had another friend who was a Jewish female secretary called Sonia Schlesing, who was an incredibly independent-minded person who often challenged Gandhi at work. And I think these encounters, again, this would not have been possible in India. In India in 1905, 1910, an Indian man could not have had a friendship with a woman. The only women he would have known would be his wife, his sister, his daughter, and his aunt. That's about it. Right. Now, so I think that's the roots of Gandhi's shedding of Gandhi's patriarchy also happened in South Africa. Now, of course, much more important, arguably, is what you alluded to, his technique of civil disobedience, which he forged in South Africa and then brought back to India and of course has found emulators all across the world, from Martin Luther King, the American civil rights movement, to solidarity in Poland and Tibet and Myanmar and hundreds of other places. And that's again uh, that was kind of innovated on the spot. So Gandhi was a lawyer. He was arguing for the rights of Indians, not fully equal rights, because this is a racist society and Indians are not going to get the vote, still less be in government. That was those positions and those privileges were reserved for the Europeans who ruled South Africa. But he wanted at least the freedom to work, to trade, to move across provincial boundaries. And when these freedoms were also curbed, uh, his first his first response was that of a lawyer. I will write a earnestly worded, carefully argued petition, and the white ruler will see the sense of it and grant us these rights. Now, when that did not happen, there was a mass movement in Johannesburg, a mass meeting of the Indians, where it was decided that we will resist and break the law prohibiting Indians from owning a shop here, from living near a white quarter, from traveling from one place to another, the law that said Indians have to carry a pass at all times. And through 1907, 1908, and then, of course, a second satyagraha in 1913-14, which has had some other provocations, Gandhi learned how to organize people uh, to resist injustice and to do so non-violently. I think so. The Gandhi's technique. One last point I'd make, and then stop. Gandhi's technique of satyagraha or non-violent civil disobedience is positioned on the one side against polite petitioning. Simply writing letters to the rulers doesn't get you justice. And the other side against violent revolution, against spectacular acts of assassination. This is a time when in Bengal, particularly, you had daring young revolutionaries thinking that if we shoot dead the British governor, the people will rise and we'll get independence. And Gandhi is opposed to such random, indiscriminate acts of violence, both on moral grounds, but also on grounds of practicality. He knows that that will never, a single individual hero cannot get you freedom. It has to be a collective mass movement in which thousands of people participate. That's how South Africa becomes the laboratory of satyagraha.
And from there to the entire anti colonial movement throughout the world, to peaceful, democratic civil disobedience and protest, which can change things. In all of that, some of that may not have been possible in, say, Hitler's Germany or in some of the places in the world today with things that are happening. But there is still a relevance, you think, of Gandhi in today's world?
Babu, so his relevance is enduring and multifaceted. So non-violent protests, I mean, as we speak, we are seeing the farmers' protests outside Delhi, which are completely peaceful and non-violent. In other parts of the world, protest demonstrations in other countries against injustice and oppression. But more than non-violent protests, the idea of interfaith harmony, of in India, the ending of discrimination against Dalits and women, it still continues. It may be a little less than it was in 1947, but Dalits and women are still less than equal members of our society. And the idea of transparency and openness. Gandhi was unique in that despite his enormous fame and power, he was always accessible to debate, to dialogue, to conversation. And I think this is it's a salutary reminder to everyone in power, not just in politics, in sport, in business, uh, in the entertainment industry. What happens that men, and it's usually men, who become successful and famous, start thinking of themselves as kind of quasi divine and infallible and perfect and above all criticism. And Gandhi was always searching, experimenting, learning, debating, and growing.
How do you think? You've been a teacher, you've taught in different parts of the world as well. What do you think? What are the ways in which students and teachers can connect with Gandhi's ideas in the classroom and in the learning space?
In some ways, it's a greater challenge for students because students are young. They're idealistic, but they're also impatient. They want very quick change. If you look at in India, it's usually young men who take to violence out of a sense of romance. It could be religious fundamentalism, it could be political extremism. But I think uh, I think if you put them in a classroom, in a class, and you just ask them to look around them at their diversity, look at their colleagues, look at their classmates. Do they share the same family experience, the same religion, the same background, the same idea, obsessions, the same prejudices? If not, can we still have a human relationship with them of reciprocity, of equality, of friendship? So even when it comes to these kinds of things, interpersonal relations, I think Gandhi is a very valuable kind of touchstone. I mean, the range of his friendships. It's, what happens, and again, I don't want to make it only about politics. What happens where to people who become famous, powerful, wealthy, successful is, as they say, is lonely at the top because they only look down, they don't look sideways. So you usually find that a top CEO, a great award winning film director, a celebrated sports person, a prime minister or a president or a general rarely has friends whom they can trust and empathize with. But one of Gandhi's most human and endearing qualities is his capacity for friendship. And I think that's something which we can all learn from.
Yeah, building blocks of empathy as well as of understanding and, in a sense, of humanity, of humanism.
Not just humanity, also kinship with the non human world, which is becoming so much more important in the time of climate change.
Indeed, absolutely. With the environment, for one, that was one of the things that he was environment friendly years before it became fashionable. Ram, let's shift tracks and start with your early years and with some of your learning cycles. You grew up in Dehradun. We've got a picture of you at the Forest Research Institute in Dehradun, which is at the foothills of the Himalayas with the peaks at the back. It's a lovely picture over there. And you spent your years there because your father was a scientist. So you were surrounded by nature and books and cricket playing a central role in your life. So, what was your childhood like?
It was idyllic except for one thing. I was a chronic asthmatic. And in Dehradun, which has lots of rainfall and all kinds of pollens, I would get periodic attacks. But it was, apart from all that you mentioned, very in a very gorgeous, as you said, gorgeous, beautiful natural landscape, loving and caring and intelligent parents, room in the campus to play all kinds of sports, and also extremely diverse campus. Because public sector institutions in the 50s and 60s and 70s had Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, Christians. Our next door neighbor was a Parsi. My doctor was a Muslim. My father's closest colleague was a Sikh from actually originally from pre-partition Punjab. So I think learning to glory in the diversity of the landscape and of the people around you. And I grew up obsessed with cricket. As it turned out, I was a rather second-class cricketer, but from the ages of 11 to 21, that was my principal obsession. All through school and all through college, I wanted to make it as a cricketer. And what that taught me in retrospect, I failed. But what that taught me in retrospect was discipline, hard work, passion, commitment.
You were at Cambrian Hall School, I think, and the Doon School later on in Dehradun. And you were in the cricket team at Doon School, I believe. What were you? You were a spinner, a leggy, a batsman, all rounder. Tell us about it.
I was an off spinner. I mean, I didn't, because of my asthma, I couldn't bowl fast. I was an off spinner. I was a decent enough spinner. Even in St. Stephen's College, where I played for 5 years, I was an off spinner. I was, in those days, if you did one thing reasonably well, you made the team. Nowadays, you have to at least do something else, either bat or field. I was a lousy fielder. I was absolutely lousy fielder, but I could bowl and hold my own as a bowler.
Before moving on to your college years, how did cricket and books come together in shaping your love for storytelling? Because the way you write history particularly, it makes it very fascinating and not the kind of histories that unfortunately a lot of people are exposed to.
So, Babu, both you and I grew up before the age of the internet.
Yes.
And also, in my case, before the age of the television, because television hasn't reached Dehradun. Television was only in the metros like Delhi, Mumbai, and Chennai. So, in the evenings, you talk to friends or you read. And there were some decent libraries. The FRI, the Indian Military Academy, was nearby. A couple of Dehradun has lots of good schools. So there were some good bookstores, Nataraj Bookseller and
Right.
English Book Depot, both on Rajpur Road. And blessed be the memory of the people who ran them, because they were happy for a young boy to just browse and even take a book on loan and return it a few days later. So I think that I think nurtured my love of books. That I had at home there were some books, not too many, but there was one book in particular where you talk about storytelling. Actually, there were two books in particular, and about storytelling. One was Mikhail Sholokov's "And Quiet Flows the Dawn,"
Close the door.
which is an 800-page epic about shortly after the Russian Revolution and Cossacks and women and peasants and intrigue and on an epic scale because Russia is like India, huge, diverse, colossal. Right, so that's one. And the other is what Rajagopalachari's translation of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
Some of the seminal books in my growing years. I was 7 or 8 when I discovered them, I think. And I was fascinated by those
And you read
books.
them again and again.
Yes.
And of course, Rajaji simplified, euphemized,
Yes.
he read the epics of some of their moral ambiguity because that's okay. He was telling the story for people like you and me.
Yeah,
He
right.
couldn't bring in caste and patriarchy and all the things that are also part of the epics. It was
Yeah.
just a story of human relationships,
Yes.
struggle, tension, evil, good, death, suffering, rebirth, told through encounters between two individuals or two or more individuals. So I'd say, I mean, I've never really thought about this before talking to you, Babu, but Shorakov and Rajaji probably somewhere influenced how I became a narrative historian. Though I had no idea then I would ever write books myself.
What about family influences, Ram? You had a sibling, you had a sister, your father and mother. What kind of
So
uh,
my
role
mother,
did they play?
my mother is in the next room as we speak. She's 96.
Wonderful.
My father died about a decade ago. And they were exemplary in their humanity and their decency, and also to some extent in their public spiritedness. So uh, my father's brother was a pioneering social reformer in Karnataka. He's still well known and highly regarded, called Gopal Swami Iyer, who started the first schools for Dalits in Karnataka. And
Is
my
that right?
father, we were born into a home of privilege, technically Brahmins, but my father detested caste privilege. So he said, "You will not wear a thread. That's a mark of your being superior. That is not for you." And in a very quiet, understated way. My mother, and in the home, there was never any discrimination on grounds of religion, caste, language. Of course, we were relatively privileged because my father was a first class government officer. My mother was a high school teacher. So there was always food on the table and always books to buy
Right.
and cricket bags to buy too, and so on, right? But I think that's what there was, and in my mother's case still is, a complete absence of prejudice, of social prejudice, and insularity, and cultural insularity in how they viewed the country and the world. So, one of my father's, my mother, of course, in Dehradun had many close Muslim friends, but also in a sense linked to where we are today. One of my father's long-standing pen pals was a Jewish rabbi he met in New York when he had gone for a conference in 1956. Until the 70s, they would correspond. So this idea of a universal humanism, subconsciously, they weren't preachers, they weren't ideologues, it's just how they lived their life. My sister saw me suffer with asthma and decided to become a doctor. And she's been she did studied medicine in Pondicherry and became a gynecologist and had taught for many years in Pondicherry and in Manipal. And through a spirit of service, I think she got it from her mother and to some extent from her father, from my parents, that she would teach, she would nurture young people, and she would never go into private practice to make money. So I think that was the kind of I think it was a very nourishing, loving, and I think morally rooted family in which I grew.
Blessed to have circumstances like that growing up in your childhood years. Let's move to college. I remember you from college, a few years junior, I believe it was, mostly in cricket whites, coming back from the college playing field or wherever in the cafe. And you were also a quizzer. I never was. I was on the stage most of the time. Theatre was my passion. But I remember you from that time and meeting you at that time. And your academic journey too is fascinating. You started with economics and then moved into sociology, then evolved into environmentalist, historian, cricket writer. How did all those transitions happen?
So about college, you just say one thing that I'd like to think myself in some ways as a typical Stephanian. In that again, there is this Catholicity of outlook. You don't discriminate about who's rich, who's poor, who's Hindu, who's Muslim, who's
Quite
not
right.
Muslim.
Quite right.
But in some ways, as the untypical Stephanian, because unlike, and you may have been like this too because of your interest in theatre, unlike 95% of my college mates, I had friends in most other colleges of their university. So through cricket, through quizzing, Thursday dinner was always in Ramjas. Through quizzing, you went to LSR, to Miranda House. So in that sense, the snobbishness, uh, the secularism that comes with being a Stephanian, I'm glad to have had. But I escaped the snobbishness and the elitism and the arrogance, which also sometimes comes with being a Stephanian, because I had these non-academic activities to pursue and to indulge.
Let me talk about quizzing, because we call this show Quizzitok, and it also has to do with questioning and asking, apart from the actual game or activity or mind sport of quizzing. Uh, how did that happen for you in college? Because I was not very aware of what was happening in that field.
I'll tell you a story about quizzing, which you've not heard of, and which will amuse you. When you did Mastermind,
Yes,
if I recall it, Doita Datta was your first winner,
absolutely.
and uh, Ajay Banerjee was your second winner.
Both, yeah, there are the
Okay,
connection.
now I'll tell you a story. Doita Banerjee, I would meet Doita Datta. I would meet quizzing in Kolkata when I was doing a PhD. But Ajay Banerjee was 1 year senior to me in school. Okay,
Is that
now
right?
it's an interesting story. So they had in the do school a S.R. Das GK competition named after the founder of the school.
Okay.
And in my when I was when Ajay Banerjee was in his 10th penultimate year, he won it. And when he was in the 11th and I was in the 10th, he won it again. But I came second. And the school custom was no one can win it twice. So although I was 30 marks behind Ajay Banerjee, I was still second. So if you look at the dual school board, it says SR Das GK competition, 1971 Ajay Banerjee, 1972 Ramachandra Guha, which was really indulgence of the school. And Ajay was fabulous. I mean, you remember him at
Yes, of course. He was later was a maths master at Doon School.
yeah. So I was interested in books and learning, and Ajay and I were the only two guys. In college, of course, it was very much more competitive, and there were people who had won the Bonvita quiz who had come from St. Columbus. But it was still very enjoyable, and I had many wonderful partners. And the person I remember with most affection was someone called V. Ramani from St. Columbus, who later topped the IAS, who came first in the IAS. And he and I would go, and he would know the science and the Hindi film songs, and I would know the cricket and the literature, and we would go around the festivals and have great fun. Yeah.
Little digression. In this day of instant information, what do you think is the relevance of something like quizzing?
Well,
Of
I think
wanting
it's
to know more
enjoyable.
and to find out?
I think it's enjoyable, it's enriching. Of course, now quiz masters and mistresses are much more subtle and nuanced in their questioning. They ask much more complex questions. In our days, straightforward, very straightforward. But of course, it should rest on deep and wide knowledge, not simply on mugging up and preparing. And I think that's I think where sometimes if you are so obsessed with winning a quiz, rather than deepening and enriching your knowledge and your learning, you may be doing the wrong thing.
Right. Ram, your work is celebrated for its depth and rigor. What's your writing and research process like? You told us a little about it, at least for your Gandhi books, because they're voluminous and very detailed and yet very engaging and very readable.
So, Babu, I'm speaking to you from my study in Bangalore, and behind me, your viewers can probably see the collected works of Gandhi and a bust of Ambedkar. I don't know how visible they are, and they are kind of what anchor me. This is where I write. I moved this summer, the summer of 2025. It'll be 30 years since my wife Sujata and I, with our two little children, moved to Bangalore. Now it is, of course, called Bengaluru. And in those 30 years, my routine has generally been several trips of between a week to 3 weeks outside Bengaluru doing research in Delhi, in Ahmedabad, in Bombay, in London, in Israel, in South Africa, whatever. And the rest of the time at home in this study writing. So I can't write on the fly. I can't write in a plane. I can't write in a hotel room. I can't even write during to take a retreat in the hills and have a gorgeous landscapes. I can't do it. I can only write in my study and on a very large desktop. And I generally write as I did this morning. We are talking. We began our conversation in the early afternoon. As I did it this morning, I spent writing a column or drafting a column. I'll have to revise and refine it. So between 9 and 1 or 1:30 is when I write. So my routine is generally get up. As was the glories of Bengaluru are its parks. So I go to Common Park every day for an hour, which is what I did. Come back, have breakfast, and then write without looking at the internet, looking at my emails. My computer has WhatsApp and FaceTime disabled. Uh, my phone is not with me, though about once an hour I take a break to see, particularly those of us who are parents, in case, and hey, even if your children are in their 30s and 40s, you still worry about them. So I go once an hour to say and my daughter called and my son called. Otherwise, it's me and my notes that have collected outside Bangalore, and my thoughts and my computer writing, redrafting. And one last thing, which is a tip for younger writers. At the end of my morning's work, so it's three and a half hours in the morning. Occasionally, I may work another hour or two in the evenings, but as older I get, that becomes more difficult. At the end of my day's work, I print out whatever I've written. Young people think they can seamlessly revise on the screen. Well, that's, in my view, is a mistake. When you print out something, like this is what I wrote here in the morning, 3 or 4 pages of print. And then you can check at what's happening, where your structure is awry, where your phrasing is clumsy, where you need to add something, where you need to delete something. And then, of course, I work with a pen on whatever I printed out, and that's how I carry it.
Very interesting insights and tips of your writing process in your sanctuary in Bengaluru.
Oh, one last thing I'd say. The hours that suits me, temperamentally and physically, the hours that suit me are between breakfast and lunch. But other people may write better after lunch, late at night, doesn't matter. But think of it like the way a musician thinks of riyaz. Several hours a day, at least 300 days a year.
Something that you persistently and consistently you have to
Oh,
do.
the way a cricketer practices.
Ram, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure listeners and viewers will find it the same. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts for the listeners?
Well, thank you, Babu. It's been hugely enjoyable talking to you. And I'd say the last thing I'd say, and since you've asked for tips, is try and for every young, or not just young, any person listening, don't spend too much time on that wretched phone of yours. I think the world is much more than what is contained in the phone. I know the phones today contain a great deal more than they did 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 8 years ago in terms of information, riches, But I think radically, if you think of the world outside the phone, outside your home, a world of books, of music, of sport, of travel, of friendship, I think you'll lead a much fuller life.
Thanks, Ram, for sharing your journey and insights with us. To our listeners and viewers, remember the greatest journeys in life start with curiosity and a willingness to learn. Keep exploring, keep experimenting, keep questioning, and stay inspired. That's all for today's episode of Quizzitok. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious to stay ahead.